I'm super excited and so grateful that you're here. I started this podcast so we could have some conversations that would hopefully help turn the messy into healing. If that idea sounds good to you, you must be a pathfinder too. Let's get started. Hi, welcome back to Talks Too Much. For those of you that continually watch my episodes, I really appreciate it. This has been a lot harder to do than I thought it would be. It's a very expensive, time-consuming hobby. And every time I get ready to quit, somebody reaches out to me and is like, oh my God, this has helped me so much, which is the only reason I wanted to do this. So today's episodes is part of the ADHD capsule, but it's also kind of part of the behavior series because that's like what I've done for 20 years. And that's sort of the purpose of this podcast is to, before I stop doing all this craziness since I'm getting older, I wanted to kind of leave it all out on the field. You know, when I started out, there was really no help for behavior. And I had one behaviorist in California that I found that changed everything for me. I mean, everything. And so I realized there was no help for parents out there in regards to this. And so I started doing this 20 years ago. So I want to share what I know and see if it makes it any easier for parents that are young, younger with younger families, mostly neurodivergent kiddos, whether it's my own community of muscular dystrophy and autism, or if it's ADHD or other things like that. From a behaviorist standpoint, the why isn't quite as important as the what to do about it, right? And since we work off the function of the behavior, like if you've watched previous episodes, that's what I talk about is the function of the behavior. Once you know the function, you can manipulate the environment to get a better result. So it's kind of that simple. So today's is about ADHD behavior tips, and I'm hoping that that's helpful. First, I want to explain ADHD because there's just like everything's ADHD now. They talk about it all the time. Back when I was growing up and I had ADHD, they didn't even know what that was. So I got mislabeled as someone who didn't try hard enough, someone who talked too much. If you've listened to my other episodes, you've heard that. All kinds of other assumptions and negative connotations because they weren't educated on it. And then there was sort of this swing where people sort of discovered what it was, and then they decided that everybody had it, or any kid that couldn't sit still in class had it. And that's not true either. A lot of times kiddos can't sit still in class because we're asking them to sit still when they're too young to sit still, and they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be learning as they move, and so it's some of it's misnomers, right? So ADHD, the best way to explain, has a problem in the reward system. You'll hear, I used to always hear, but they can play video games for hours. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it doesn't mean somebody doesn't have ADHD, okay? It's a lower baseline of dopamine, which is a transmitter that signals reward, interest, and motivation. And so in typical brains, it's like a steady release all the time. And in ADHD brains, the brain struggles to maintain dopamine between the start and the reward. Like it's very difficult to get going. It's very difficult to keep going. They need rewards that are immediate or novel, like really exciting new things, or emotionally engaging things. That is what gets our dopamine going, and enough to get through tasks, especially tasks that you don't care for, are going to be really hard because they don't have those components, right? It's a disorder of time and delayed gratification. So like, I love Trevor Noah because he best explained it like there's now and there's not now. And I laughed so hard when I heard that because that is so true. That is exactly, you can ask my partner, that's how I operate. He's like, I love that you're so in the moment. But once in a while, we got to look ahead, and I have trouble doing that unless it's right, right now. And then I'm in. It's also an interest-based nervous system activation, right? So they want new, challenging, and emotionally charged things like we talked about. We get mislabeled as lazy, and I heard my entire life, if she would only apply herself or try harder, she'd be so good, but I try harder than most of the people I know. And anyone who knows me knows there's nothing lazy about me. But that is how it showed up, and that's what it looks like. It's actually a neurochemical inconsistency, right? And you're constantly seeking dopamine. So that get you in trouble, right? Because you can have impulsive behavior and a lot of lack of emotional control. And, working memory issues and regulation issues. And those are all things that were very difficult for me and all of the kiddos that I've worked with that have ADHD. There is a confusion nowadays. This was really prevalent when I worked in the school districts. There is a big confusion between anxiety, depression, and ADHD and trauma, right? Because everybody kind of labels everything ADHD. And for the sake of a behaviorist, it doesn't matter. Those labels really don't matter. We're looking at the function of the behavior, what they're trying to get or what they're trying to get out of. And then we go from there. So it's kind of not as relevant. But like a lot of people that are using medications or using medications with their kiddos, teachers that are suggesting medications to parents which they are not supposed to do, and I hear that constantly. Um, it's not it's not prudent, and it's not wise, because unless you're a clinician, which by the way I am not, but unless you're a clinician, you don't know what chemical neurodevelopment things are going on. You're just looking at symptoms. So that's where it gets really tricky, okay? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental issue, and it involves underactivation of dopamine. Anxiety and trauma involve overactivation of the amygdala, which is part of your brain, and the stress hormones like cortisol. You've all heard of that, right? So we're talking about two totally different functions, but oftentimes same symptoms, okay? So you have to be very careful, because giving stimulants to anxiety or trauma-based issues can cause like hyperarousal and can cause some really difficult behaviors. So I just wanted to start with that background. So I was responsible enough to explain. Here's some examples for you. ADHD is sort of like my brain can't hold focus and I can't regulate, right? My brain tries to self-regulate by seeking stimulation. So I need structure. I need possible medication. It's not for everybody, but in some instances, it's very, very helpful. Executive functioning scaffolding, which is breaking things down. I'll explain that later. And sensory input. That's ADHD, right? Anxiety is my brain won't stop warning me. It's too much go signal. I'm restless, and that mimics hyperactivity, right? But that restlessness is coming from fear, not boredom. There's a very big difference, right? And so I need calming tools and maybe some cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness and predictable outcomes. And I need sensory downshifting rather than seeking sensory. So those are two different responses, right? And then there's trauma. And that means my body does not feel safe enough to focus. I can't settle into my body enough because it doesn't feel safe to be in my body, and I can't focus. Okay, that's completely different. That's someone who sees danger everywhere and oscillates between hyperarousal, panic, anger, and hypoarousal, which is fatigue and disassociation. And they need relationship safety. They need body-based regulation like somatic work or bilateral stimulation or polyvagal exercises. These are all things you can like chat GPT and look up, or we can talk about later. You can ask your providers if they know about this, which your typical pediatricians aren't trained in the differences. You need to probably seek a developmental pediatrician or a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help work through these things. So Today I'm going to give behavior tips on ADHD. Once again, as a behaviorist, I don't really care what it is, okay? Because there are some better tips for ADHD, but they also work for autism, and they're also going to work for anxiety, and they're also going to work for trauma. Kiddos with trauma, right? So they're going to work for all of it, even though there's a distinct difference between all of them. The behaviors tend to look the same. So the tips I have today for you, first one is first of all, I'm going to give you these tips and I'm going to basically start with the littles, but all of these tips work for littles, teens, and us adults. It's just you scale up um, the example. So I'll try to show you as I go through this. So for instance, structure, right? For littles, visual charts and pictures and things like that. For teens, they need to learn how to schedule on their phone and have some structure in their day. And same with adults. If I have all day to get one thing done, I might not even get that one thing done. If I have all day and I have 50 things to do, I'm probably going to get a good chunk of it done because I have some structure. I have to put some structure to my day to get all that done. And I've got dopamine working for me. So structure, giving warning before transitions. A lot of littles, the timer, the old-fashioned timers work good. The phone is okay, but the visualness of a old-fashioned timer is really cool. Teens need to learn timers on their phones, and adults, we have trouble with transitions too. Like I get stuck in a project and I'm going and I'm engaged and I want to finish it. And so I really have trouble getting torn away to do something else. So I have to set alarms for myself as well, still to this day, right? Transitions are still hard for me. Um, Short, clear directions, like avoiding multi-step directions. I still, as an adult, struggle with go here, 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 turn left, right, auditory directions like that. So our littles, their peers might be doing multi-step directions and they might still be in a one step. They might eventually they'll go to a two step or a three step, but it might take them longer than it would their typical peers. Also understanding the reward system. Okay, this is really big. So I give the example of stickers. Like stickers drive me crazy because I'll have teachers. They'll be like, "Oh, I have a sticker chart." Okay, that's great if they care about stickers. Not everybody's motivated by tangible items, which is what a sticker is. So first of all, you have to make sure the kiddo is motivated by a tangible item. And then you have to make sure they care about that sticker. And it's not a Matchbox car or a Pokemon thing or some other tangible item. The other things that kiddos are motivated by are freedom, adult approval, and peer approval. So, in other words, if I have a kiddo, which happened often, that was motivated by tangible items, right? So, some sort of Matchbox car or thing. Okay, if you get through this assignment, you get to pick something out of the box, right? That worked for the tangible kid. For the freedom kid, that doesn't work. So what worked for him was as soon as you get through this, I'm going to leave you alone and you can do what you want for 5 minutes. Two totally different reward systems. Same with teens, same with adults. So if you don't understand the reward system, the thing that you're trying to give them doesn't matter. And then I hear parents and teachers all the time say, I've tried everything and he doesn't care about anything. Probably not true. He probably does. And it's probably one of those four, and you haven't really figured out which four yet. And you haven't figured out something within those four to get them motivated, right? Catch them being good. This is something a lot of people don't do. They're just focused on the negative and picking apart someone. We are pretty sensitive people with ADHD. I call them my canaries, right? So we're very, very sensitive. So just picking them apart all the time is just demoralizing, and they end up having no will to go and keep trying. And so it works the opposite way that it might on a typical kid, right? Typical kid, you might shame them or say something and they want to please you. So they're gonna work harder. This will also work with people motivated by peer approval or adult approval, right? But a lot of our ADDers aren't. They're motivated by those other things. So that can be tough. You give them positive reinforcement, it's like what you focus on expands, right? So if you're constantly saying, I like how you did that, or you did that really well, or boy, you were on time today, that was amazing. It is tend to be helpful, more helpful than the picking apart and focusing on the negative, because those tend to grow when you focus on them. And celebrating effort, not just outcome. Sorry, I gotta get comfortable. So, for instance, if they did a project and they worked really, really hard, but the outcome didn't work, you're taking away all of that they really disciplined and forced themselves into doing by just focusing on the fact that the outcome didn't work. So make sure you celebrate the effort. You teach self-regulation early. Obviously, us adults in my era, that was not a thing, so we never learned that. So it's taken me a long time to learn how to self-regulate. I've had to learn how to help my partner help regulate me when I'm out, or we co-regulate each other. This is a really big thing. It sounds like a new agey kind of thing. It's not. It's science and it's central nervous system. ADDers have trouble with regulation. So if you start with your kiddos young to teach them how to self-regulate themselves, they'll have a lot better odds when they're a teen of not using the wrong things to regulate themselves. So it'd be like pausing tools such as breathing games, smelling the flower, blowing out the candle, just that could be a whole separate thing that we could talk about, some of the activities that help with self-regulation, or you can chat GPT it, but those are some examples. Most of our kiddos do have sensory integration issues, and that's another thing you can look up separately. But swinging, spinning, weighted blankets, um, lifting weights, obviously not for our Duchenne community, but some of the other kiddos, anything like that. Those are all sensory techniques to ground them and get them back in their body, because a lot of the times we're just up here flying around and we're not really in our bodies. And so that would really help them quite a bit. Movement breaks or doing tasks while in motion. I try to work with teachers on this, you don't have to teach students math or how to read by having them sit in a seat for 2 hours when they're 6 years old or 7 years old. That's crazy. I mean, most good teachers know that and they get them up and they move them around. But the same goes at home. When we're doing tasks that we don't want to do, but you've got to learn to do them, make it a game, make it fun, make them move, Even today as an adult in conferences, I either have to sit up in the front row or I have to walk and pace in the back, because if I sit too long, my dopamine's gone and I start dozing off, no matter how engaging the content is. It's just, that's what happens. So they need to move. A lot of times they need to move. That is tough with our Duchenne community because that is one of their biggest issues, is movement. And so there's a lot of tricks of the trade that you can get them to feel movement without actually having to use their body. And of course, that's a separate thing. I can't go into each example too much or I won't get through this in time and I'll lose ya because it'll go on too long. Emotional vocabulary. So like learning to name your feelings and naming them without judgment. So like my son, when he would have his autistic kind of behaviors, right? And he would do something that was inappropriate. A lot of times, like hit another kid or spill something because he wanted to watch it come out of the jar or whatever, and he knew it was wrong and he'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, that's so bad. And I'd always be like, That's not you, that's your body doing that. Or that's the behavior. It's not you, right? You as a person aren't bad. That behavior is not good. That behavior is not effective. That behavior is not going to get you what you want. If you can't calm your body down, I totally understand. That's just your body acting like that. That's not you and who you are. And to be honest, I still use that with my kiddo today in his late that stages of Duchenne. I say, yeah, your body really sucks, but that's not who you are, right? So just separating out that can take the shame out of it, and it can be an easier conversation that then all of a sudden it's like, hey, my body feels really antsy. Hey, my body feels this, that. I feel really sad. I feel really upset. I feel really angry. And instead of being like, well, it's not appropriate to be angry like right now, then that opens the door to be like, why? Let's talk about that. Let's figure that out and walk backwards. Um, Far more powerful because, a lot of times we as parents and definitely teachers, because they're so strapped with resources and amount of kids in their classroom, we're really focused on compliance. We're not really focused on the why. Why are you doing that behavior? What are you trying to communicate with me? And that is a far more effective way to start solving behavioral issues than just trying to worry about compliance. Which brings me to power struggles, right? That's exactly what it is. And that's why ADHD kids will be worse if you get a really controlling teacher or you get a new teacher that's really nervous, and tries to compensate by being controlling or being more strict. That tends to not work with our kiddos. You need someone that's confident and structured. And, the power struggle thing, they're not trying to get your power. They're trying to get some of their own. And if you know that and you take yourself out of it, then you can come up with all kinds of ways for them to feel powerful and that behavior will go down. And so I do a lot of yes after you too. Like the minute a lot of our kids with ADHD also are very oppositional, right? And so the minute they hear the word no, it really doesn't matter what follows. It doesn't matter if you have the best reason in the entire world. And some of you parents think I don't even need a reason. I just said no, and that's that. And I get that. I totally get that. And yes, most kids should accept that answer, but our kiddos, it just brings up the opposition and becomes a power struggle that unfortunately you're probably not going to win. So we always do yes after you. So I figured out at one point that I could literally say yes to a kid, my kids, other kids about basically almost everything, but it was under my conditions. So it was, yes, you can have that dessert after you finish dinner. Or yes, we can go for ice cream tomorrow after school. I mean, it just doesn't have to be a no. It's just a yes, even if it's something crazy like my teenagers, like I want to go with my friends to this by myself to Mexico and she's 17. Yes, absolutely. That's going to be great after you turn 18 or after you turn 21, right? So it's just a way to set them up to make it very difficult for them to be oppositional. Um, Chunking tasks. Tasks need to be broke down into chunks, right? We talked about, I kind of touched on executive functioning, but it's a big issue in ADHD, right? So things need to be broken down into chunks. And I think, yeah, so that's basically like your executive functioning is basically like your administrative assistant in your head, and they have to organize everything and put everything together. And that is really, really difficult for ADDers, right? What was that? My own personal therapist called it something like it's like you have a four-way stop and the light is out. That's what it's like. It's like stuff's coming from everywhere. And so it's very difficult to organize that information. You need chunking tasks. You need to figure out, like when they're teenagers, they can use AI now. Like my son, who is turning 24 on Sunday, actually, has ADHD, and ChatGPT and all of those AI tools have become just a godsend for him getting through medic school because he can make schedules, he can organize all his information, he can throw it all in and it does an outline for him. So nowadays, there's lots and lots of tools that can make that a lot better. Breaks, flexible seating. Like I said, I have to stand because when I teach at ASU, when I would teach in the classroom, I always let my kiddos stand or walk or move or go to the bathroom when they had to. Um, yeah, that was really, really important because I knew at least a quarter of the class had ADHD, right? Or something similar, anxiety, trauma, whatever. Actually, if we include all those, probably even higher than a quarter of the class. So I had to let them move, right? They had to move, and everybody seemed to do much better when I would do that. So, connection and co-regulation, right? We talked about regulating together, like rolling them up in a sheet like a burrito, and playing a game and getting that sensory, feel that for the littles, I guess you can't do that to your teenager, but I would sit on, you could sit on, I used to sit on one of my kiddos. We can't do that with our Duchenne kids, but I would do that with my typical teen. Um, Anthony, I guess I would put him a lot of times. I did have a little weighted blanket and I'd put him in a beanbag. And that was his me time. It wasn't a timeout, it was a me time. Timeouts, I think I did another thing on this earlier, but timeouts only work if the function of the behavior is to gain attention or gain connection, but they're doing it in an inappropriate way. Then you can say, go to this place, calm down. You're removing the thing they're trying to get, which is the attention or the connection. But if they're trying to escape a task and you give them a timeout, like if they're acting up in class because the math is too hard and the teacher thinks it's for attention and she moves them out for a timeout and it's really because the math is too hard, she's rewarded him and that behavior will increase. And that's science. So I got off on a little bit of a tangent about timeouts, but I was really talking about the sensory stuff like in a bean bag or a weighted blanket, but it kind of all goes hand in hand. So um also modeling calm. So I said our kiddos with ADHD are canaries, which, if you don't know that reference, canaries in the coal mine. They would take the canaries down in the coal mine because they would let the miners know that there were dangerous, poisonous gases before any other measurement, right? Because these canaries were so sensitive. That's how I see my ADDers, right? Or kids on the spectrum, same thing. They're just really, really sensitive to the environment. They're sensitive to energy. So when you are stressed, they feel it, they're going to react to that. So that's a whole other episode, how we've got to get you as a parent well in order to have real success with your kids' behaviors. Because a lot of times, even if you're faking it and you're trying to do your best, which I get, and sometimes that's all we can do, they still feel it. They still know. So you're only going to get so far in fixing some of these behaviors until you yourself can calm your body and regulate yourself. The other part of that is ADHD is very often passed through families. So the chances that you or your husband or somebody in your family, I just assumed women were watching this, but there might be some men, so maybe it's your wife. But oftentimes it's handed down through families. So imagine me with ADHD trying to help my kid with ADHD, right? Or my kid with autism and Duchenne. Really difficult because I have to regulate myself. I have to get structure myself. I have to chunk my tasks. So that's the second part to it. That's really challenging. And then we need to teach them time awareness. So, visual timers, like I said, are really good, or just understanding when it's time to go, or setting time. Like I said, in ADD, it's like there's now and not now. So, I may have to leave at such and such time, and then I don't pad the 10 minutes before that to get my things together to walk out the door. So I'm just constantly like running out. So using timers on your phone for teenagers, using timers on my phone works. And for little kids, again, I like the visual timers because then they can actually understand it a little bit better. But I still use, and then breaking things down, I still use a dry erase board. Like, I know that seems archaic with all the technology we have, but I actually like wipe off once I do the tasks, and it actually keeps me focused. So I'm not like all over the place. If I have to pick up my phone and look at it, I might not. Where it's in front of my face, I do. And with our kiddos, I used to, when they were little, I would do picture schedules. I had a book, like one of those plastic books that you could put pictures in. I had a book of um, all the steps to getting dressed, and I had a chart, or they could check it off, or I had pictures as to all the stops we were going to make while we were in the car, like the grocery store, the laundry, the this, the that, the typical places we went, or I gave them something like made it a game so they could check off the places we went. So, yeah, things like that really, really help. Practicing working memory stuff helps too, because the working memory is impacted. So, like games like Simon Says and things like that, there's all kinds of memory games. Again, you can scale it up for teens and adults, but we definitely struggle with our working memory. Outdoors. So the balance between activity and recovery is really tough too. Probably part of that time thing. So got to be outdoors. And that is so, so tricky right now with all the technology. So the way that looks is after you play out, yes, you can play your game after you play outside for 15 minutes, and get some fresh air, whatever. And parents, I have a lot of parents too that are like, well, I can't stop them from playing the games. And I'm like, can't you change the password to the internet? Like, there are things you can do, definitely, to take back control of that situation. Oh, but they're going to get upset. Okay. So that's going to be uncomfortable for a little while, but in the big picture, that is much better to gain control of your household instead of having your kiddo run it. So, kids don't feel safe, like I've said in other behavior episodes that I've done. They don't feel safe when they think they're in charge. They do not need to be in charge. So there's a way to do it kind. There's a way to do it where it's not a power struggle, where it's like, honey, I'm so sorry this is how you're feeling, but we're not going to do this right now. We can do this after we do blah, blah, blah. Um, then it's you're still the boss, but you're doing it in a really kind way. That's not going to create more opposition and having them dig their heels in. I mean, it might for a little bit, but it'll go away. Sleep is really tough for ADDers. So consistent bedtimes, no screens an hour before. I have one of those Aura rings now, and I have trouble falling asleep sometimes. And so when I'm by myself, I don't when I'm with my partner, but when I'm by myself, I do. So I'll want to put a screen on and watch something in my bed. And every time I do it, I get like a terrible, terrible sleep score. And I have data and science to show it now. So, and the consistent bedtime too. I never realized until I was an adult how important that really is. And then protein for breakfast, no sugar for breakfast, like pancakes and all that stuff. There's enough research now that we know that ADDers need protein, need a lot of protein. And need their sugar stabilized, because a good majority of us have sugar issues. And that makes a big difference. So that's it. So for adults, whether you have real ADHD since it runs in your families, again, or if you have those attributes because of anxiety and trauma, unfortunately, parents, you have to do all this too, and you have to do the work too. You have to set the example. I hate saying that to parents, especially in my own community with Duchenne, because we're so stressed out, and all the parents I work with, they're all in fight or flight. And I was for years, and it took me a long time to really like want to change that, because it was just easier not to. And I was already overwhelmed, right? So I got to tell you, but the way to really, really help your kids' behavior is to really, really start trying to heal yourself. And again, I am always someone you can reach out to, because I am not prescribing or describing anything for you to do that I have not had to trudge my way through. So there is no judgment. I just know. I know what's true scientifically about behavior. I know what's true after doing it with families for 20 years. And I also know it because I've just had to do all of this. And it's been the work of my life. It's taken me so long to figure all this out. I guess that's another reason why I want to put this out there. So maybe things get a little easier for you a little bit sooner than they did for me. It's really hard to keep structure when you're in crisis. And a lot of us are in crisis like all the time. And I'm not saying people don't have really hard stuff. I've had really hard stuff. In fact, right now I have really hard stuff, but I've learned how to stay out of crisis, even though it's really hard. And so that has got to be something that's got to be addressed, or the behavioral stuff that you're doing with your kids is literally just a Band-Aid. Because if you're not in that space, they're not. You can fix it a little with them. You can do all these tips and you can do all this stuff and it will make it better. But it just ultimately is really not going to set in until you're able to do it for yourself too. So again, another podcast episode, another conversation anytime you want to have it. But we can't ask our kiddos to do something we're not willing to do. We can't expect them to regulate themselves when we can't regulate ourselves. So that's it. Those are my big tips for ADHD, for behavior. And I hope this was helpful. And of course, I just scratched the surface on some of that. Some of those I have much better examples. You can always reach out to me and we can always talk about your kiddo. Again, I'm doing episodes with real families where we're talking about real scenarios, and we're working through them boots on the ground so that people can actually hear the application of these scientific principles and how you apply them to a real life scenario and have it work or help a little bit, right? So if you're interested in being on the podcast, please reach out as well. And I think that's it for today. So I'm going to actually go get outside. And so I hope you all have a wonderful day. And I appreciate you coming and spending time with me today. Thanks for being here with me on Talks Too Much. If today's episode helped you see things a little clearer, or you feel a little less alone, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget, have faith that struggles you're in will soon be your strength. I'll see you next time.